Fail is a four-letter word, and being labeled as a failure is a fear a lot of people have. Failure as a leader, a father, mother, entrepreneur, or just consistently falling short of those hopeful New Year's resolutions. So today, we're going to go over 5 things that will cause you to fail your goals and how you can overcome them by applying some lessons from a book called The Dip by Seth Godin. This is a tire tube, and like a lot of things in life, tire tubes have what's called a Goldilocks zone. Too much air and they're going to break. Too little air and they're not effective at all. Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with hitting your goals. Well, let me ask, what does putting 10 pounds of pressure into a 20-pound tube actually accomplish? Nothing. So the first thing that keeps people from reaching their goals is they don't have the resources to see their goal through to completion or to the point where it's at least self-sustaining. So we need to get into the habit of asking ourselves questions. Things like, do I have the required resources of time or energy or money to see this through to completion? Or again, to where it just becomes self-sustaining and starts to fulfill itself. In essence, do we have enough of a runway to build up some momentum and some lift so we can take off and actually start to see some results? I've seen this a ton with entrepreneurship and also sales contractors where I really kind of got my start. Big example that I've seen a lot of is in real estate sales, where depending on the market conditions, in order to start seeing commissions and checks that come in, you need an average of about 3 months of financial runway before you can start to see revenue in a real estate sales business. You kind of essentially allocate a month to acquire a client and prepare a home for a sale, and then another month for the marketing process and getting that home under contract, and then finally another month of closing, which means that you need those 3 months of time and the financial runway and energy to see that sale through to completion, not to mention any additional costs incurred from marketing and lead generation. And this goes across the board for all entrepreneurship. So let me ask, how much of a runway do you need to reach your goal? What are those inputs and upfront investments? And most importantly, how long can you sustain those investments before seeing results? This is the first major obstacle in achieving a goal. People just haven't stopped to count the cost, or they dramatically miscalculate it and they just hope that things will work out. When they just hope and they wing it, things don't typically go as they hoped for. And the sad part is that this can be easily overcome with just some preparation and thorough research. Asking thoughtful questions to those who have either accomplished it already or whose job it is to coach you, to prepare you so you can get through this, is more than enough to avoid this pitfall. The next key point is, how do we make sure that we have those resources so we can make sure that the tire gets full? Well, you quit. I know it's counterintuitive. The best in the world are the best quitters in the world. And that might sound like heresy. So before I get tossed out of a window, while quitting is one way to look at it, I prefer the term sacrifice, because the best at what they do, the people who are consistently hitting their goals and resolutions, they know what to sacrifice versus what to stick with. And they even take it a step farther by surrounding themselves with people who understand their sacrifice and accept the cause that they're engaged in. And you look at any professional athlete and you can see this in their bodies. The foods that they choose to give up, the time that they invest into their craft rather than on hobbies or friends and family, the amount of money that they invest to leverage other professionals to coach and prepare them so they can become even better than they currently are. These are all sacrifices, and they enable them to perform at the highest level when it matters the most. And here's really the crux of the issue. Sacrifice is the vehicle of transformation. Every great sculptor knows that it's more about what you cut away from a block of raw marble rather than what you add to it that makes it a sculpture. And the high performers of the world know this too. And so what are the things that are diluting your time, your energy, your financial resources? These things that are spreading you too thin. Is it people? Most of us have heard the adage that you're the average of the 5 people that you spend your time with. So let me ask, are those people your past self, your present self, or do they reflect the future version of you? Is it your food and your health, what you're drinking, what you're putting into your body? We need to ask ourselves, is what we're eating making us better? Or is it something closer to a sugar-coated poison? And with our finances, this is a huge one for a lot of us. We need to understand the difference between an asset and a liability. Is this something that we need or want? Is this producing more for us? And really, only you decide those things. And so you need to identify what those things are. So the next major thing that holds people back is just picking the right objectives, really knowing what to sacrifice versus what to stick with. And Seth outlines that there's 3 possible outcomes for all activities, and he draws them with these curves. The first one is the dip, and then the cul-de-sac, and then finally the cliff. The dip can be characterized with 2 indicators. First one is incredible payoffs for top performers. And then the second one is resistance. This resistance only goes one way, as we're traveling uphill. So anything worth doing is going to have this massive resistance curve, some kind of barrier to entry or obstacle that we have to overcome in order to become one of those top performers. And then those top performers are going to be greatly rewarded. And I'm going to get a little bit more into this here in a minute. Now, the second and the third curves are the ones that we need to watch out for. The second one is called a cul-de-sac or a dead end, and it's very simple. It's a dead end job. It's a place to hide, a place to stall, to wait for something better to come along. We need to avoid those. And in all honesty, we need to be focused on finding the dip curves. And the third one is the cliff. The cliff can most easily be characterized by being too good to be true. Impossible. And frankly, you should be able to smell this one a mile away. If you really need help on this one, all I would simply say is, where's the drop off? Can you see a dip curve? Can you see a drop? And then can you see the rebound? Because if you can't see both, there's a good chance that somewhere there is a sudden sheer cliff. This can be easily seen in products and drugs that lead to quick highs with an empty feeling inside, or cheap relationships, or that promise of fast money with no to minimal work. All of these things are just cliffs that'll leave you hanging in a moment of crisis. Now, this next one is where we reach what's been my personal demon of most of my failing of my great dip idea projects, and it's called shiny object syndrome. At the risk of stating the obvious, even when you identify a good dip project, there's a chance you can screw it up. And the biggest one in this case is shiny object syndrome, where you don't see it through to completion and you get distracted by something else. And so here's the analogy that my mentors drilled into my head for this to sink in, right? So let me ask a question. How useful is a half-finished bridge? Even if that half-finished bridge is an 8-lane super highway, is anyone able to use that? No, right? And so let's go ahead and pretend like accomplishing a goal is like trying to go from one island to another. And the only way we have to get there is by building a bridge. Again, we have to make sure that the bridge is completed before it can do any good. And so the first thing that we have to do is get some stage of completion. What my mentors encourage me to do is to first identify the very beginning stage of completion. What does a 2-lane version of the bridge look like? And then once the 2 lanes are finished, then I can start to expand and build additional lanes. Because here's the thing, a lot of times, myself included here, we get some grand, ambitious project into our minds. We see the finished project, right? We know what we want it to look like, but we don't have all of the resources needed to get it to the 8-lane superhighway phase. And so we struggle to accept that there are progressive baby steps that we can accomplish along the way, but that can still build payoffs to provide us with additional resources so that way we can eventually build that fully realized 8-lane version. It's that old adage of don't let perfect stand in the way of good enough. Because what happens when you never see something through to completion, or where you don't get at least the first minimum viable product out to market, right? If you do this over and over and over again, you actually begin the risk of labeling yourself as a failure. And I have actually walked that road, or should I say bridge, and it's not a pretty one. So stay focused on your first bridge and make sure you finish the job. Because here's the best part. These kinds of bridges, they begin to operate like a toll road. They bring additional assets and resources to you in the form of health, time, money, energy, and fulfillment through things like relationships. And the great thing is that these bridges begin to compound through reinvestment. And so what we need to focus on is completing that bridge one at a time getting the initial minimum viable product out to market, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's your health, your mental well-being, your financial situation, all of that needs to get some kind of baseline in place before we can expand. And then we're better off reinvesting what we accomplished rather than trying to increase our bottom line. The best bridges operate like a toll road. They're always bringing additional assets to you once they're complete and they're up and running. And as we take these additional resources, we have the opportunity to compound our investments by reinvesting them back into ourselves and into our goals and to accomplishing more things that'll build more bridges and bring us more resources. And it's here that you start to begin to experience that infinite, that exponential growth curve that so many people talk about. And the final thing Seth really hammers is, are we actually aiming high enough? And the value of being number one in our field. And this is the most important lesson from the dip that I've learned, is that it provides the most energy and impact to your life to strive to be the best in the world. And here's what that means. Since the introduction of the internet, society has become way more connected. And since there are so many of us operating together, it's created tons of unique subgroups, niches within groups, within tribes. So being the best in the world is now a very subjective term. And Seth points out that it's really more like being the best in your world and how valuable it is. So I want to illustrate this with some numbers to help put this into perspective. So if you take the world of Major League Baseball, or MLB, and you look at the salaries, this becomes very clear pretty quickly. Now, the MLB doesn't have a salary cap, and so it's about as close to a free market as a sports league can be. And when you look at the salaries across the board, as of this recording, there's about 975 Major League Baseball players. And at this time, the highest paid player in the MLB is a tie between Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. They're both paid $43,333,333. They're both obviously bringing quite a bit of value to their teams. Now, let's compare them to the player that's paid the 97th highest, whose salary would be considered that benchmark for the top 10% of value in terms of just how they're paid. That 97th player would be Ryan Presley, who's paid $14 million. The difference between those players is $29,333,333. And that's nuts.
Oh my God.
If you do the math on that, that's a 210% gap in pay between the top dog and the guy who's still doing pretty dang good at the top 10%. That's the difference between being top 10 versus the best in the world. Now let's take that a step farther. There's an impressive gap also between the first percentile and the second percentile. So if you take the top 9 players, total their salaries, they become the first percentile, collectively making $344 million in change. Now the next 9 down collectively makes $284 million in change. So that difference is almost $60 million. That is a 21% difference. That's not a small difference for just a first and second place finish. That's the difference between best in the world and second best. Let that sink in. So I want to encourage you to set a goal that encourages you to become the best in your fields, in your niche, in your thing. If you do that, the difference for you is not just for you, but also for your entire life and the people that are around you is life-changing. We need to start setting goals that encourage us to put in the level of work that excites us. We need to be all in. Else, how are we ever going to get through those hard times and be willing to push through that? That's probably another amazing lesson from Grant Cardone's book, 10X, is we need to put in so much work that it becomes unrealistic for us to fail. Or we're never going to be willing to put in that kind of work if we're not excited by an accomplishment that we want to reach and to strive for. And that's really what this kind of comes down to. Because my favorite lesson that I learned from the dip is actually almost unspoken. You already have all of the raw materials inside of you to be successful. Everything you need just needs to be refined and shaped and chiseled. It needs to be cut and defined and removed, simplified, focused. And it's easy to get caught into the trap that we need to be more in order to be better. And that's the message of most media these days. But really, it's about being focused, focusing what we already have onto a few clear objectives and committing to them. That's going to bring us a return on our investment of time, energy, and money. And the reason I wanted to produce this video and release it now is because it is quitting season. For most New Year's resolutions, this point of February is where we're squarely in the dip, where we typically realize that we can't do everything. And so I wanted to give you these tools to help you realize that it's about focus and commitment, so that way you have the energy and the resources available to push through that steep uphill climb. Because I can tell you, the peak is worth the work. Hopefully you found this content helpful, and if you enjoyed it, feel free to check out videos like this one.